The fluorescent lights of the university library buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Elena Martinez hunched over her laptop, the glow casting shadows beneath her sunken eyes. It was 3 in the morning. Around her, the vast reading room stretched empty and silent, rows of books standing like witnesses to her desperation. Her fingers trembled as she typed another line of her thesis, not from caffeine, but from the hunger gnawing at her stomach. She'd eaten half a granola bar 16 hours ago. 23 years old, a scholarship student from nowhere, and now 7 months pregnant with a secret that could destroy what little she had left. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. Hollow cheeks, tangled hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes that had forgotten how to hope. She barely recognized herself anymore. This wasn't supposed to be her story. She was supposed to graduate, get a good job, send money home to her mother in that cramped apartment where the heating never worked. She was supposed to be the one who made it out. Instead, she was hiding. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her swollen belly, feeling the kicks of 3 tiny lives she hadn't known she was carrying until the free clinic doctor had looked at her with pitying eyes and said, "Miss Martinez, you're having triplets." Triplets. The word still felt like a punch to the chest. She closed her eyes, and against her will she was back there, 6 months ago. The charity gala her roommate had dragged her to, the one where wealthy donors threw money at scholarship students like they were zoo animals performing tricks. Elena had worn a borrowed dress 2 sizes too big, had stood in the corner nursing a single glass of champagne she didn't even want, counting the minutes until she could leave. And then, he had approached her. Damien Cross. Even saying his name in her mind made her chest tighten. She'd known who he was, of course. Everyone did. The 35-year-old billionaire whose face graced magazine covers, whose tech empire had revolutionized everything from healthcare to finance. Dark eyes that seemed to see through every wall you'd ever built. A smile that could charm senators and seduce saints. He'd asked her about her research, actually listened when she talked about sustainable energy solutions for low-income communities. Made her feel, for one impossible night, like she mattered, like she was more than her student loan debt and her secondhand clothes and the shame of never having enough. One night. That's all it had been. She'd slipped out before dawn, knowing it was a fantasy, knowing men like Damien Croft didn't end up with girls like Elena Martinez, knowing that whatever magic had existed in those hours would shatter in the harsh light of reality. She'd never called the number he'd written on the hotel stationery. And when she discovered she was pregnant 5 weeks later, standing in the bathroom of her shared apartment with 3 positive pregnancy tests lined up on the sink, she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't tell him. Men like Damien Cross had lawyers, had power, had the ability to take away anything they wanted. And she had nothing. Nothing except these babies growing inside her and a desperate, ferocious need to protect them from a world that would see them as pawns in a billionaire's game. So she'd hidden, changed her phone number, avoided anywhere he might be, worked 3 part-time jobs while trying to finish her degree, watching her savings dwindle to nothing as her body grew heavier, more exhausted, more impossible to sustain. The fluorescent lights flickered. Elena's vision blurred. She'd been having contractions for hours, she realized dimly. She thought they were just the Braxton Hicks the clinic doctor had warned her about, but they were getting stronger, closer together, and she was only 7 months along. Too early, too soon. Elena tried to stand, and her water broke. The rush of warm fluid soaking through her jeans brought a moment of pure, crystalline terror. She was alone. It was 3 in the morning. She had $17 in her bank account and no health insurance beyond the emergency Medicaid that had taken her 3 months to get approved for. Her phone. She needed her phone. Her fingers fumbled across the desk, knocking over her cold coffee. The liquid spread across her notes, bleeding the ink into illegible rivers. She grabbed the phone, tried to dial 911, but another contraction seized her. This one so powerful she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only grip the edge of the desk and wait for it to pass. "Help!" she whispered to the empty library. "Please, someone, help!" The security guard found her 20 minutes later, curled on the floor between the stacks, gasping through contractions that were coming every 3 minutes now. He called the ambulance, held her hand, told her it would be okay, even though they both knew he was lying. The ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and sirens and the paramedic's calm voice asking her questions she couldn't answer. "Who's the father? Is someone meeting you there? Do you have any family we can call?" No. No. She was alone. She'd been alone for months, and now these babies were coming and she wasn't ready. Would never be ready, but they didn't care about her fear or her empty bank account or the fact that she had no crib, no diapers, no plan beyond surviving one day at a time. The hospital was chaos, bright lights and urgent voices and hands lifting her onto a gurney. A doctor appeared, young and serious, explaining something about preterm labor and NICU and risks she didn't want to understand. "You're having triplets," he said, as if she didn't know, as if the fact hadn't been eating her alive for months. "We need to prep you for an emergency C-section. The babies are in distress." Distress. Her babies were in distress because she'd been too proud, too scared to ask for help, because she'd been living on granola bars and library coffee, working herself into exhaustion, pretending she could handle this alone. "I'm sorry," she sobbed as they wheeled her toward the operating room. "I'm so sorry." She didn't know who she was apologizing to. The babies? Herself? Dodd, maybe, though she'd stopped believing in divine intervention around the same time she'd stopped believing she deserved anything good. The anesthesia made the world soft and distant. She felt pressure, heard the doctor's murmured instructions, existed in a strange space between consciousness and darkness. And then, piercing through everything, a cry. Thin and reedy and furious, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "Baby A is out," someone announced. "It's a boy." Another cry joined the first. "Baby B," another boy. Elena tried to speak to ask if they were okay, but her tongue felt thick and useless. A third cry, stronger than the others. "Baby C, girl." 3 babies, 3 tiny lives that depended entirely on her, and she had nothing to give them except love, and love didn't pay for formula or diapers or the NICU care they would need. The hospital recovery room was quiet. They'd taken the babies away, too small, too early, needing machines to help them breathe. A nurse with kind eyes had shown her photos on a tablet. 3 impossibly tiny humans with tubes and wires, fighting to survive. Her sons, her daughter. Elena stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how to tell them someday that their mother had brought them into a world she couldn't afford, with a father who didn't know they existed. The door to her room opened. She assumed it was another nurse, come to check her vitals or ask questions about feeding preferences she didn't have the luxury of having. But the footsteps were wrong, too heavy, too measured. Elena turned her head and her heart stopped. Damian Cross stood in the doorway, still wearing a $1,000 suit despite the late hour. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the thin hospital mattress. "Hello, Elena," he said quietly. His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, controlled, devastating. "I think we need to talk about my children." The hospital room suddenly felt suffocating, the walls pressing inward as Damian Cross closed the door behind him with a soft, deliberate click. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she thought it might shatter. Her hands gripped the thin hospital blanket, knuckles white, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move. She had just been cut open. Her babies were fighting for life in the NICU, and the one man she'd been hiding from for 7 months was standing 3 feet away, looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. "How?" Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tasted metal and fear. "How did you find me?" Damian's jaw tightened. He moved closer and she noticed details she'd missed in her panic. The exhaustion etched around his eyes, the wrinkled collar of his usually pristine shirt, and the way his hands were clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from something. Anger, maybe. Or worse. The hospital flagged the birth, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Triplets born to an unmarried mother, with no insurance, no support system, no father listed on the intake forms. The administrator is on my company's board. He called me as a courtesy because, apparently, Elena, you listed me as an emergency contact on your university medical forms 2 years ago, before you disappeared. She had. God, she'd forgotten about that. A stupid formality during freshman orientation when they asked for someone other than family, and she'd been so stupidly infatuated after their first meeting on a campus innovation summit that she'd written his name without thinking.
They had every right to inform me that someone might be trying to commit paternity fraud. His words sliced through the air like surgical blades. That someone might be using my name, my reputation, to gain. I didn't tell anyone. Elena's voice rose despite the pain radiating through her abdomen. I never said they were yours. I never asked you for anything. I was handling it alone. Handling it? Damien's control finally cracked, his voice rising to match hers. You were living in a dorm room, working 3 jobs while pregnant with triplets. You collapsed in a university library at 3 in the morning. You call that handling it? Tears burned Elena's eyes. She wouldn't cry, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. I was surviving. That's what people like me do. We don't have the luxury of calling billionaires for help. People like you. He stepped closer, towering over the hospital bed. Up close, she could see the storm in his dark eyes. Anger, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like hurt. What exactly does that mean? It means I know how this works. A rich man sleeps with a poor girl gets pregnant. A rich man's lawyers show up with NDAs and settlements and threats. I've seen it happen to girls from my neighborhood. I wasn't going to be another statistic, another problem to be paid off and forgotten. So instead, you were going to raise my children, if they're even mine, in poverty? Let them struggle because you were too proud to pick up a phone? If they're even yours? The words hit her like a physical blow. You think there was someone else. Damien's expression went cold, the careful mask of a businessman sliding into place. We spent one night together 6 months before you disappeared. I think you're a smart woman who knows exactly how much a man in my position would pay to avoid a scandal. And I think 3 babies are worth approximately 3 times the usual settlement. The room spun. Elena couldn't breathe. The heart monitor beside her bed began beeping faster, louder, but she barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. Get out, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere until... Get out! She was screaming now, pain and rage and heartbreak tearing through her. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to drop out of school and work myself sick and live on crackers and fear? You think I wanted my babies born 2 months early because I couldn't afford decent food or prenatal care? A nurse burst through the door, eyes wide with alarm. Miss Martinez, you need to calm down. Your blood pressure. He needs to leave. Elena was sobbing now, couldn't stop, couldn't control the grief pouring out of her. Please make him leave. The nurse turned to Damien, her expression hardening with the protective authority only medical professionals could wield. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step out. She's just had major surgery, and this stress could... I'm not leaving until I get answers. But Damien's voice had lost some of its edge. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or the first crack in his certainty. The babies, Elena choked out between sobs. Are they okay? The nurse's expression softened. They're stable, small, but fighting. The NICU team is excellent. But you need to rest, Miss Martinez. You can't help them if you don't heal. I want to see them. In a few hours when you're stronger. Right now you need... I want to see my children. Elena's voice turned to steel despite the tears still streaming down her face. Please, I need to see them. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. I'll arrange it, but first, this gentleman needs to leave. Damien didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time. The vulnerable young woman in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the confident scholar he'd spent the night with, the one who challenged his views on economic inequality with statistics and passion, who'd made him laugh for the first time in months, and who'd looked at him like he was a person instead of a net worth. "He knows you can easily fake a DNA test," he said quietly. "One night, that's all we had. How do I know those babies are mine?" Elena met his eyes, and in that moment, she had nothing left to lose. No pride, no dignity, no hope that he might believe her or care. "You don't," she said flatly. "And I don't care if you believe me. I didn't ask you here. I didn't want you here. Those babies are mine. I carried them. I kept them alive when I could barely keep myself alive. And I will fight with everything I have to make sure they never know their father thought they were a scam." "Then you won't mind a DNA test." The words fell like a guillotine blade. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating, final. "You're serious." Elena's voice was barely a whisper.
I have a responsibility to my company, my family, my shareholders. I can't. He ran a hand through his hair, the first gesture of uncertainty she'd seen from him. There are people who would do anything to gain access to my resources. People who have tried to trap me with false paternity claims before. I need to be certain. So that's what I am to you? A trap? A gold digger who got pregnant on purpose to... She couldn't even finish the sentence. It was too absurd, too cruel. I need to know the truth. The truth? Elena laughed, a broken sound that hurt her surgical incisions. The truth is I loved you. After one night, like an idiot, I loved you. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified you'd think exactly what you're thinking right now. So I hid. I worked myself sick. I went hungry so I could save money for after they were born. I did everything wrong because I was scared and alone. And I thought it was better for them to have a poor mother who loved them than a rich father who would always wonder if they were a con. Something cracked in Damien's expression. Elena, do the test. She turned her face away, unable to look at him anymore. Take your samples, get your proof, and then leave us alone. It's not that simple. If they're mine, they are yours. She screamed it. Pain be damned, blood pressure be damned, everything be damned. Every time I look at them on that screen, I see your eyes, your nose, Her voice broke. But go ahead. Doubt me. Doubt them. Get your evidence that your lawyers can file away when you decide how much we're worth. The nurse stepped between them, her voice firm. That's enough. Sir, you need to leave now or I'm calling security. Damien looked like he wanted to say something, argue, apologize. Elena couldn't tell. But he just nodded, adjusting his suit jacket with practiced precision, sliding the businessman mask back into place. I'll have my legal team contact you about the DNA testing process. It can be done quickly, painlessly for the infants. The results will be conclusive. Your legal team? Elena closed her eyes. Of course. And Elena, she heard him move toward the door, then pause. Regardless of the results, I'll make sure the babies receive proper medical care. They're in the NICU. That's expensive. Consider it covered. I don't want your money. It's not for you, it's for them. The door opened, closed. He was gone. Elena lay in the empty room, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling hollowed out and raw. The nurse touched her shoulder gently. Let me get you something for the pain, she said softly. But there was no medication for this kind of pain. The kind that came from having the father of your children look at you like a criminal. The kind that came from knowing that in a few days, some lab technician would prove what she already knew, and it wouldn't matter, because Damien Cross had already decided who she was. Her phone buzzed on the side table. Through blurred vision, she saw texts flooding in. Her roommate, her mother, her academic advisor, all wondering where she was. She couldn't answer, couldn't explain that everything had fallen apart, that the secret she had kept for 7 months had exploded in the worst possible way. Instead, she pulled up the photo the nurse had taken. 3 tiny babies, barely bigger than her hand, fighting in their plastic incubators, completely unaware that their existence had just become evidence in a case they never asked to be a part of. The door opened again. Elena's heart seized. Had he come back? But it was a different nurse, pushing a wheelchair. The NICU said you can have 15 minutes, she said with a kind smile. Let's get you to your babies.
As they wheeled her through the hospital corridors, Elena realized with sick certainty that this was only the beginning. The DNA test would come back positive, she knew it would, and then Damian Cross, with all his money and power and lawyers, would have a decision to make. And she had no idea which outcome she terrified more, him walking away or him staying. The NICU doors loomed ahead, and through the window she could see the 3 tiny incubators lined up in a row. Her children, her whole world. And somewhere in this city, their father was probably already making calls, setting the machinery of doubt and verification into motion, preparing for a battle she didn't know how to fight. The nurse wheeled her inside, and Elena reached trembling fingers toward the nearest incubator where the smallest of her sons slept under warming lights, completely unaware that his existence had just become evidence in a case he never asked to be a part of.
"Hello, my love," she whispered. "Mama's here, and I'm never letting you go." But even as she said it, she could feel the walls closing in. Lawyers, tests, custody battles. A world designed to favor men with money over women with nothing but love. The fight had only just begun, and she was already so tired. The DNA test happened on a Tuesday morning, clinical and cold as the autumn rain streaking down the hospital windows. Elena watched through exhausted, red-rimmed eyes as a lab technician in blue scrubs swabbed the inside of each tiny mouth, her son's first, then her daughter, who squirmed and cried despite being barely 3 days old. Each swab felt like a betrayal, like she was allowing strangers to question the very existence of her children. Damian stood on the opposite side of the NICU, maintaining the careful distance he'd kept since that first explosive confrontation. His own cheek swab had been collected by a different technician, everything documented by a stone-faced woman who'd introduced herself as his attorney. Everything official, everything prepared for court, if it came to that. It would come to that. Elena knew it in her bones. "Results in 48 hours, the attorney said, her voice devoid of warmth. She was maybe 40, blonde, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire year of tuition. "The circumstances?" Elena repeated hollowly. "You mean given that Mr. Cross needs to know if his children are inconvenient enough to require his attention?" The attorney's expression didn't change. "We'll be in touch." They left. Damian, his attorney, the lab technicians with their samples sealed in official containers, and Elena was alone again with the machines beeping, monitoring 3 lives that hung in the balance in more ways than one. A NICU nurse named Patricia, who'd been kind to Elena from the beginning, touched her shoulder gently. "You should rest. Go back to your room. We'll call if anything changes." "I can't leave them." "You had major surgery 4 days ago. You're not healing properly because you won't sleep, won't eat. Your milk isn't coming in because you're too stressed." Patricia's voice was firm but compassionate. "You can't take care of them if you destroy yourself." But leaving felt like abandonment. Like if she turned her back for even a moment, someone would come and take them away. Social services, lawyers, Damian himself with whatever rights the DNA test would grant him. Elena's phone buzzed. Her mother, calling for the 5th time that day. She couldn't answer. Couldn't explain how spectacularly she had failed at everything. School, life, protecting her children from becoming pawns in a billionaire's game of verification and doubt. The 48 hours stretched like torture. Elena existed in a fog of pain medication and fear, shuffling between her hospital room and the NICU, pumping breast milk that barely came, trying to find some way to bond with babies she could barely touch through the incubator walls. The triplets remained stable, but fragile, breathing on their own now, but still so small, still needing careful monitoring. She'd named them in secret, without telling anyone. Names she whispered when the nurses weren't listening. Matthew, Lucas, and Sophia. Strong names. Names that meant gift, light, and wisdom. Names for children who would need to be strong in a world that had already labeled them as questions to be answered, rather than lives to be celebrated. Damian came every day. He never spoke to her, just stood at the viewing window,
watching the babies with an expression Elena couldn't read. Sometimes his hands would press against the glass like he wanted to reach through it. Sometimes he'd stand there for hours, making phone calls in low voices, conducting business while his potential children slept 5 feet away. On the second night, Elena found him there at 2 a.m. She'd come down for a pump session, hadn't expected anyone else. He looked terrible, tie loosened, jacket discarded, dark circles under his eyes that matched her own. "Can't sleep either?" The words escaped before she could stop them. He turned, surprised. For a moment, she saw something raw underneath. "They're so small." Premature babies usually are. The doctors said if you'd been getting proper prenatal care, proper nutrition, they might have made it to full term, might have been born healthier. It was an accusation wrapped in an observation. I felt it like a knife between my ribs. "You're right," I said quietly. "I should have asked for help, should have put my pride aside, should have called you the day I found out I was pregnant and begged for money like you clearly expected me to do." I moved to one of the incubators, placed my palm against the warm plastic. But I was scared. Not of being poor. I've been poor my whole life. I was scared of being nothing, of being the girl who trapped Damien Cross, the gold digger, the scandal. I was scared my children.
3 days before that night with Damien, the campus party her roommate had dragged her to, too many drinks, trying to forget her student loan statements and her mother's medical bills. A guy from her economics class. Marcus? Michael? She couldn't even remember his full name. A stupid, drunken hookup in a bathroom that she'd regretted the second it was over. She'd blocked it out, convinced herself it didn't count, didn't matter, was just a mistake she'd never repeat. She'd forgotten about him completely. Until now. "Oh my God," Elena breathed, collapsing back onto the bed. "Oh my God." Damien was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "You did sleep with someone else." It didn't mean, I didn't even know it was possible to." She couldn't form sentences, couldn't think past the horror unfolding in front of her. "Who was he?" Damien's voice could have cut diamonds. "I don't even remember his name. It was one time, 3 days before it was nothing. It was a mistake. I was drunk and stupid and..." "Nothing?" Damien stood, towering over her. "You're telling me that one of those babies has a different father and you don't even know his name?" "Mr. Cross," Dr. Chen interjected, "I understand this is distressing, but perhaps we should stay out of this." Damien didn't take his eyes off Elena. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I didn't know. How could I possibly know that..." She couldn't form sentences, couldn't think past the horror unfolding in front of her. "You told me I was the only one. You looked me in the eye and told me..." "You were the only one who mattered." Elena was screaming now, tears streaming down her face. "You were the only one I remembered, the only one I thought about, the only one I..." She couldn't say it, couldn't admit that she'd loved him even before that night, had been half in love with him for 2 years, watching him from afar like a stupid girl with a stupid crush that should have stayed fantasy. Damien turned away, his shoulders rigid with fury. "I don't even know who you are. I'm the woman raising your children, your sons. Who cares about Sophia's father? He doesn't even exist." "He exists enough to have contributed half her DNA." "So what?" Elena's voice broke. "So what? Are you saying she matters less because some random guy I don't even remember is her biological father? She's still your son's sister. She's still mine. She's still..." "A complication I never agreed to take on." The words hung in the air like poison. Elena felt something inside her shatter completely. "Get out." "Elena, get out of my room. Get away from me. Get away from my children. 2 of them are my children, and 1 of them isn't, and apparently that's enough for you to, what, reject all 3 of them? Claim your sons but leave their sister behind? Break apart a family before it even begins?" Damien's hands clenched into fists at his sides.
This is exactly what I was afraid of. Exactly the kind of mess I was trying to avoid. Well, congratulations. You have your proof. You have your evidence. You know exactly what I am now. Not a con artist, just a stupid girl who made mistakes and has to live with the consequences. We both have to live with them. No. Elena met his eyes, and hers were blazing despite the tears. I have to live with them. You get to choose. You get to take your sons and your money and your lawyers and walk away from the parts that don't fit your perfect billionaire life. That's what men like you do. You don't know anything about me. I know you'd abandon a baby girl because she's not genetically convenient. Dr. Chen cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should take some time to process this information. There are legal considerations, custody arrangements that we'll need to... I want a lawyer, Elena said flatly. I want the best family law attorney who'll take my case pro bono or on contingency, or whatever, because I'm not letting him take Matthew and Lucas and leave Sophia behind. They're siblings. They're a unit. And if he tries to separate them, I will fight him with everything I have. Damien looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. You named them. Of course I named them. They're my children. Our children, he corrected quietly. 2/3 yours, 1/3 some strangers. Do the math, Damien. Figure out what percentage of my family you're willing to invest in. He turned and walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. I need time to think.
Take all the time you need, Elena said coldly. We'll be here. All three of them. Because I don't abandon my mistakes, I love them. The door closed behind him. Dr. Chen sat in the uncomfortable silence, then said gently, Miss Martinez, I know this isn't what you expected. Please leave. If you need resources, counseling, support groups for complex family situations, please, just leave me alone. He left, taking his tablet and his clinical explanations and his careful professional sympathy with him. Elena sat in the empty room, staring at the 3 photos taped to the wall beside her bed. Matthew, Lucas, Sophia. 3 faces that looked nothing like each other yet, just wrinkled and red and perfect. 2 boys who would grow up as cross heirs, billionaire children with every advantage. 1 girl who would be, what? The half-sister? The complication? The reminder of her mother's mistakes? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Klein, attorney at law. Damien Cross asked me to reach out regarding custody arrangements for the 2 male children. We should meet ASAP to discuss terms. Not the children, not the triplets, the 2 male children. Like Sophia had already been erased. Elena looked at that message for a long time. Then she opened her phone's browser and typed, Family law attorneys, low-income clients. The war had begun. And this time, she wasn't facing it alone and scared. This time, she was a mother with everything to lose, which made her more dangerous than Damien Cross could possibly imagine. Elena found her lawyer in the most unlikely place, sitting in the hospital cafeteria at 6 a.m, drinking terrible coffee and reviewing case files with the exhausted determination of someone who never stopped fighting. Her name was Rebecca Torres, 53 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun, and eyes that had seen every dirty trick in the family law playbook. She ran a small practice that specialized in representing low-income mothers against wealthy fathers who thought money could buy children like they bought everything else. I've been following your case, Rebecca said bluntly when Elena approached her table, having gotten her name from a sympathetic social worker. Damien Cross, tech billionaire, used to date my daughter before he decided she wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. I've been waiting for him to screw up badly enough that I could take him on. Is this about revenge? Asked Elena carefully. This is about making sure powerful men don't get to pick and choose which of their children deserve their love. The revenge is just a bonus. Tell me everything. So Elena did. The whole story. The night with Damien, the forgotten encounter 3 days before, the pregnancy,
The hiding, the DNA test results that had blown apart any hope of a simple resolution. She held nothing back. Every humiliating detail laid bare. Rebecca listened without judgment, taking notes in careful shorthand. When Elena finished, she was quiet for a long moment. The heteropaternal superfecundation is actually our strongest weapon. How? Because it makes his position indefensible. If he tries to claim custody of the boys while rejecting the girl, we paint him as a monster who would separate siblings. The optics are catastrophic. Billionaire abandons baby girl because she's not genetically his. The media would destroy him. I don't want to use my children as weapons. Then you'll lose them. Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. Damian Cross has unlimited resources. He can drag this through courts for years, bankrupt you with legal fees, hire experts to prove you're an unfit mother because you were malnourished during pregnancy. He can bury you. The only way to fight that is to make the cost too high. Not in money, but in reputation. Elena's hands trembled around her own terrible coffee. What if he walks away from all three of them? What if I push too hard and he decides none of us are worth the trouble? Is that what you want? For him to disappear? I don't know. It was the most honest thing Elena had said in weeks. Part of me wants him gone so we can just be a family without his lawyers and his doubts and his... She couldn't finish. And part of you still loves him. Elena's eyes filled with tears. How stupid is that? After everything. After the DNA test and the accusations and the way he looked at Sophia like she was a mistake he didn't sign up for, I still remember the man who listened to my ideas about sustainable energy, like they were mattered, who made me feel seen for the first time in my life, who looked at me like I was extraordinary instead of expendable. That man might still exist somewhere under the fear and the lawyers. Or that man was always a fantasy, and this is who he really is. Rebecca studied her. What do you want, Elena? Not what you think you should want. Not what's practical. What does your heart want? I want my children to have a father who loves all of them, who doesn't see Sophia as less than because of biology. I want... Elena's voice broke. I want Damian to fight for us, the way I've been fighting for us. I want him to choose us, not because a DNA test says he has to, but because we matter. All of us. Then that's what we ask for, Rebecca said. Not custody arrangements or visitation schedules. We ask for all or nothing. He commits to being a father to all three children equally, or he gets none of them. He'll never agree to that. Then we'll find out what kind of man he really is. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later in a conference room at Rebecca's office, neutral ground, away from the hospital and its memories. Damian arrived with his attorney Jennifer Klein and 2 other lawyers Elena didn't recognize, an army preparing for war. He looked worse than she'd ever seen him, gaunt, hollow-eyed, wearing expensive clothes that hung wrong on his frame like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. When his eyes met hers across the conference table, Elena saw something that made her breath catch. Not anger, not calculation. Grief. Before we begin, Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the tension, I want to establish something clearly. Elena is not here to negotiate custody of 2 of her children. She's here to determine whether Mr. Cross intends to be a father to this family, or a genetic contributor to 2/3 of it. Jennifer Klein bristled. My client has every right to establish custody of his biological children without taking responsibility for a 7-week-old infant girl whose only crime is existing, Rebecca finished coldly. Yes, we're aware of your client's position. We're also aware of how that position will look when we share it with every media outlet in the country. Billionaire abandons baby girl, claims brothers, but rejects sister. Can you imagine the headlines? Are you threatening us? One of the other lawyers, a severe man in his 60s, leaned forward.
I'm clarifying stakes, Rebecca replied calmly. Elena doesn't want your money. She doesn't want a drawn-out custody battle. She wants to know whether Damian Cross is the kind of man who can love a child who isn't genetically his. Because if he can't do that for Sophia, she doesn't trust him with Matthew and Lucas either. Damian spoke for the first time, his voice rough. You'd keep my sons from me? I'd keep your sons with their sister, Elena said quietly, where they belong. You're asking me to raise another man's child. I'm asking you to raise your son's sister, to be part of a family instead of a genetic portfolio. You don't understand what you're asking. Damian's control was fracturing. I have a company worth $12 billion. I have shareholders, board members, family trusts that specify biological heirs. I have cousins who would sue me for including a non-biological child in inheritance plans. I have a grandmother who... He stopped, jaw working. This isn't simple. No, I agree. It's complicated and messy and hard, just like every real family. I didn't sign up for this. Neither did I. Elena's composure finally broke. You think I planned this? You think I wanted to fall pregnant with triplets from 2 different fathers? You think I wanted to be the genetic anomaly that shows up in medical journals? I wanted a degree and a career and maybe someday to fall in love with someone who wouldn't look at me like I'm a problem to be solved. That's exactly how you look at me. Like I'm a mess you stepped in. Like my children, our children, are complications instead of human beings who will grow up knowing their father had to be forced to love one of them. Silence fell over the conference room. Damian stood abruptly, walked to the window overlooking the city. His shoulders were rigid, hands clenched behind his back. He stood there for 5 minutes. 10. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably, checking phones, exchanging glances. Elena just watched him, trying to see past the expensive suit and the billionaire armor to the man underneath. Finally, he turned back. His eyes were red.
I went to see them this morning, he said quietly. The triplets. Before coming here. I've been going every morning for the past week, before the nurses start their rounds, when it's just me and them in the NICU. Elena's heart clenched. She hadn't known, hadn't seen him there. Matthew looks like my father, Damian continued. Same nose, same serious expression, even in sleep. Lucas has my mother's chin. I spent an hour this morning just watching them, imagining what they'd look like at 5, at 10, at 20, whether they'd inherit my terrible eyesight or your stubbornness. Damian. And then I looked at Sophia. His voice cracked. She's smaller than her brothers, more fragile. And I thought, he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I thought, what kind of monster walks away from a baby? What kind of man sees 3 siblings and chooses only 2? Elena couldn't breathe. My father left us when I was 7, Damian said, decided his new family was more important than me and my sisters. I built my entire life around never becoming him, never being the man who abandons his children. And here I am planning to do exactly that to Sophia because she's not genetically convenient. Mr. Cross, Jennifer Klein warned, I strongly advise you not to... I'm adopting her. The words came out firm, final. If Elena will let me, I want full legal adoption. I want Sophia to have my name, my protection, my... His voice broke completely. I want to be her father, really her father. Not just genetically, but by choice, by love. The conference room went silent. Elena was crying, couldn't help it, great gasping sobs that hurt her still healing incision. You mean it? I've been terrified, Damian admitted, crossing to her side of the table, kneeling beside her chair. Terrified of being trapped, of being used, of repeating my father's mistakes. The DNA test was supposed to give me certainty. Instead, it gave me a choice. And I choose them. All of them. All of you.
Your company, your family, your inheritance can all go to hell if they don't accept my daughter." He took her hands, and his were shaking as badly as hers. "I'm not saying I know how to do this. I'm not saying it won't be complicated. But I'm saying I want to try. I want to be there for 3 a.m. feedings and first words and terrible twos. I want to teach them to ride bikes and help with homework and embarrass them at graduation. I want—" He stopped, looking at her with raw honesty. "I want us to be a family. However that looks. Whatever that means. Even though Sophia isn't yours, biologically, she's mine in every way that matters. Her brothers are my sons, which makes her my daughter. Biology is just one way to make a family. Love is another." He smiled through his own tears. "A smart woman once told me that at a charity gala when I was being an arrogant ass about adoption programs. She said family is what you choose to build, not what DNA forces on you. I should have listened then." Elena remembered. She'd been so nervous that night, challenging a billionaire's views on social programs. He'd actually listened. Had changed his foundation's funding priorities based on their conversation. Maybe the man she'd fallen in love with had been real after all. "What about Sophia's biological father?" Rebecca asked carefully. "Have you been able to locate him?" Elena shook her head. "I found him on social media, Marcus Chen. He graduated last year, moved to Seattle for a tech job. I sent him a message explaining the situation. She pulled out her phone, showed them the response. "He said he's not ready to be a father, signed away all parental rights, and asked not to be contacted again. He wants nothing to do with us." "Then that's settled," Damien said. "I'll file adoption papers immediately. And Elena," he met her eyes, "I want to do this right. Not just swooping in with money and lawyers and taking over. I want us to figure this out together. Co-parenting or—" he hesitated, "or whatever you're willing to try. What are you asking?" "I'm asking if the woman I fell in love with that night is still here. If maybe, despite everything, we could try to build something real. Not for the babies, but for us." Elena's heart was breaking and healing simultaneously. "You hurt me. You doubted me. You made me feel like nothing." "I know, and I'm so sorry. I was scared, and I lashed out, and He squeezed her hands. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." Rebecca cleared her throat. "My job here is to protect my client's interests, and right now, I'm going to advise Elena that you're a good prospect for joint custody with generous child support. Romance is separate from legal agreements." "Agreed," Elena said. "I need time, Damien. I need to heal, physically and emotionally. I need to learn how to be a mother, and I need to know this isn't just guilt talking. That a week from now, a month from now, you won't look at Sophia and resent her for being complicated." "Fair," Damien said. "So let me prove it. Let me show up every day. Let me earn your trust back. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we can talk about what comes next for us."
Jennifer Klein looked like she was having an aneurysm. "Mr. Cross, the legal implications of what you're proposing will be handled by Elena's attorney and mine, working together instead of against each other." Damien stood, helped Elena to her feet. "I'm tired of fighting. I just want to go meet my daughter properly. Will you come with me?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. They left the lawyers to hammer out details, custody arrangements, financial support, adoption proceedings, and drove to the hospital together in Damien's car. The silence was companionable now instead of hostile, both of them too wrung out for more words. The NICU was quiet during afternoon visiting hours. The triplets were in their incubators, all three stable enough now that they'd be going home soon. The reality of that, 3 newborns, 2 adults trying to figure out how to be parents, was terrifying.
But as Elena watched Damien carefully wash his hands according to NICU protocol, then approached Sophia's incubator with the reverence of someone handling something precious and breakable, she felt hope kindle in her chest. "Hello, Sophia," he said softly, placing his palm against the plastic. "I'm your dad. I know that might sound weird since we're not biologically related, but—" His voice caught. "But I chose you, and I'm going to keep choosing you every single day for the rest of your life. You and your brothers. You're mine. All of you." Sophia slept on, oblivious to the promise being made. Elena moved to the other incubators where Matthew and Lucas were starting to stir. "And these are your brothers, who you're going to love and fight with and protect for the rest of your life. We're really doing this. We're really going to be parents. Together." "Separately together for now," Elena corrected gently, "until we figure out what together means." "Separately together, then." He reached across the space between the incubators, found her hand, squeezed it. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on us." They stood like that for a long time, hands linked, watching three tiny humans who would grow up never doubting they were loved, never questioning whether they were wanted, never having to prove they deserved to exist. 6 months later, Elena stood in a courthouse wearing the first new dress she'd bought with her own money in 2 years, money from the part-time remote job Damien's company had hired her for, analyzing sustainable energy proposals. She had her degree now, finished online while juggling 3 babies and healing from everything that had broken. Rebecca stood beside her as witness. Damien's mother and sisters sat in the front row, good women who'd welcomed Elena and the triplets with open arms once they understood their son was serious about this unconventional family. The judge looked down at the papers. "Mr. Cross, you understand that by finalizing this adoption, Sophia Martinez will become your legal daughter with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." "I understand, Your Honor," Damien said firmly. "And you're certain this is what you want? There's no genetic obligation here. You could walk away." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The judge signed the papers. Just like that, Sophia became Sophia Martinez Cross, legally and completely Damien's daughter. Outside the courthouse, Elena's mother held Lucas, while Damien's sister managed Matthew. Damien carried Sophia, who was grabbing at his tie with the determined grip of a 6-month-old who'd inherited her mother's stubbornness. "We did it," he said to Elena. "We're officially a family." "We were always a family. Now we just have paperwork to prove it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. They were taking things slow, dating like teenagers between diaper changes and 2 a.m. feedings. But there was love there, growing stronger every day. Real love, built on honesty and struggle and choosing each other repeatedly. "I have something for you," Damien pulled out a box. Elena's heart jumped. "Damien? It's not what you think. Open it." Inside was a key. "Key to your place?" she guessed. "Key to our place. I bought a house. Big yard, good schools nearby, enough bedrooms for the triplets to each have their own space when they're older. I want you and the babies to move in. Not as my girlfriend, not as some arrangement, as my family. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Elena looked at the key, then at her children, then at this man who'd fought through his own fear to become the father her babies deserved. "Okay," she said. "Let's go home." And as they walked down the courthouse steps together, 2 imperfect people, 3 perfect children, and a future they'd build one day at a time, Elena finally believed what she'd been too scared to hope for, that family wasn't about DNA, or money, or the right circumstances. It was about showing up, choosing love, fighting for each other even when it was hard. It was about 3 babies who would grow up knowing they were wanted, not because biology said so, but because 2 people decided they were worth fighting for. All of them, always.